Over the weekend, the US and Israel launched a joint attack on Iran, killing the regime's supreme leader and other key military personnel. The strikes came after indirect nuclear negotiations between the US and Iran ended last week without a clear deal. In response to the joint attack, Iran has launched strikes across the Middle East. In today's podcast, we'll unpack the lead up to this weekend, what we know about the initial attack, and what we can expect for the region.
Okay, Lucy, so on Saturday afternoon, our time, we began seeing these breaking news alerts and hearing reports that something was happening in Iran. Before we get into what actually happened over the weekend, can you give us a bit of background on what had been happening with Iran in the lead up to this week?
Yeah, the interesting thing about the attacks on Saturday was that they were actually widely expected. That's because Donald Trump had been threatening to attack Iran for weeks amid ongoing negotiations between the two countries and internal uprisings. We'll take those two topics one by one, starting with the internal unrest in Iran. So back in December, the largest civilian protests in Iran since the 1979 revolution kicked off. Demonstrators were calling for the end of the Iranian regime, and local health officials told media that an estimated 30,000 protesters have been killed, though it'll be a long time before we have something like a accepted death toll.
Yep, and that's because there was a media, communications, internet blackout, very little information that could be verified coming out of Iran. Different humanitarian groups have estimated the death toll to be at different figures, so it will take some time for a uniform number to come out. But at the moment, the estimates are well into the tens of thousands.
So that's basically what you need to know in terms of what's been going on inside Iran. Now, in terms of Iran's relationship with the broader world, the US and Iran ended a round of negotiations to limit Iran's nuclear capability just last week.
Okay.
So they had been engaging in diplomacy. The mediator of those negotiations said, quote, significant progress had been made, but there was no deal reached. And amid those talks, Trump said the US would, quote, have to make a meaningful deal with Iran, otherwise, quote, bad things happen.
Yep. So we heard that language from Trump towards the end of last week, this kind of threat, I suppose, that if Iran wouldn't come to the table and make a deal on its nuclear program with the US, that this looming threat of action from the US was promised by Trump. What was the window that he had given the regime in terms of an expected response?
So he suggested a 10-day window for the regime to respond. And during this time, the US military presence in the region continued to grow. And that looked like an aircraft carrier and guided missile destroyers moving towards Iran, gathering in the Mediterranean. So the threat, taken together with the buildup of this kind of military presence in the Middle East, had led many to believe the US was imminently going to attack Iran.
So, Lucy, many were expecting the US would attack Iran. The writing was on the wall. Talk me through what actually happened on the weekend.
Yeah, so all of this backdrop then led to the US and Israel launching a joint attack on Iran. Now, following initial reports, Trump said, quote, our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime. And so what he's talking about there is about, or we can sort of infer that what he's talking about there is the possibility of Iran building a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
So as we've said, the US and Iran were in these negotiations. They're in these negotiations because the US and Iran had previously signed a deal where Iran promised to only develop nuclear energy, not weapons, and in exchange, the US was going to lift some of its limitations. The US pulled out of that deal back during Trump's first term, so they've been involved in negotiations to come up with a different deal. And it was also the source, according to the US and Israel, of the strikes on Iran last winter, Australian winter. So that's what the US and Israel said they were doing, targeting nuclear and military facilities in Iran.
And from Trump's reports after that strike last year, the US framing was that Iran's nuclear capability had been obliterated by US strikes. But then we heard later from other experts who questioned that and estimated that perhaps these strikes had set Iran's nuclear capability back somewhat, but had not destroyed it entirely.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Sam. I'm the co-founder of TDA. With one button, 82% of you who aren't subscribed to this YouTube channel can change that and help Australian media. Click subscribe. Now back to the video.
On Saturday, local time, Trump confirmed that the strikes had killed the regime's supreme leader. That's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. It can't be overstated how important the supreme leader is to the running of the regime. Since the 1979 revolution, Ali Khamenei has held almost all decision-making powers in Iran.
Okay.
So on this, Trump said the Ayatollah was, quote, one of the most evil people in history. He said he was dead, which was, quote, not only justice for the people of Iran, but for all great Americans and those people from many countries throughout the world that have been killed or mutilated by the Ayatollah and what Trump called, quote, his gang of bloodthirsty thugs. In addition to the supreme leader, the strikes also killed another 7 Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps leaders. Now, I know we've talked about this on the podcast before, but just to recap, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, this is sort of a paramilitary organization that exists in Iran alongside the country's official military, and it's very, very closely tied to the Ayatollah. Now, a representative for Iran actually spoke to the UN Security Council on Sunday. They had an emergency meeting. And this representative said US and Israeli strikes on a school had killed more than 100 children. Trump has not commented on these reports, and they have not been independently verified by any media organization at the time of reporting.
Okay, so what we do know for sure is the US and Israel have launched these significant strikes on Iran. As a result, their supreme leader, the Ayatollah, has been killed. How has Iran responded?
Yeah, so beyond that appearance at the UN Security Council meeting, we have some reporting from the Iranian state media. So we've heard from the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament. In a statement published by state media, he said, quote, the Americans and Israelis have crossed a red line and will be held accountable. He said the retaliation will be, quote, so devastating that they will be forced to beg for mercy. And the regime then responded with retaliatory strikes across the Middle East, striking Israel, striking the UAE, where the defense ministry said one civilian had been killed in a residential area. The UAE also said it had intercepted, quote, a number of missiles, and there were reports that Dubai airport had been hit. Over in Iraq, strikes killed 2 military personnel and wounded 3 others, according to Reuters. And Bahrain has confirmed a US Navy base and residential buildings have been struck.
That US Navy base, I think it's worth noting, had already been evacuated. So there were not American troops at the facility. They'd been evacuated in preparation for these strikes, but still an important part of the response to note. So Lucy, it appears then that this isn't just contained to Iran. There are multiple nations, regions that seem to be affected. Why is that?
Yeah, so it appears that Iran is attacking not just Israel, but also anywhere that there is an American presence, an American military base.
Okay.
So Iran is a long way from the US. You need a special kind of missile in order to be able to launch it across such a far distance. So if they want to attack America, they go to a target closer to home. And there's also the fact that Iran backs and supports a number of groups across the region. So that looks like Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that connection could bring other players into this conflict, although we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. What about Australia? Obviously, the United States is a key ally for the Australian government. How have we responded to the strikes? Have we heard from Albanese?
Yeah, so Prime Minister Albanese said, quote, we support the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent Iran continuing to threaten international peace and security. That was right after the first wave of strikes. He added, quote, Australia stands with the brave people of Iran in their struggle against oppression. On Thursday, the Australian government told the families of diplomats to evacuate their postings in Lebanon and Israel. And it also told those families of diplomats in other countries, including Jordan, it's sort of very strongly suggested that they should leave the region.
Yeah.
Smart Traveller, which is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade's kind of public-facing arm, has put Iran, Israel and Lebanon on its do not travel list, quote, due to the volatile security situation, armed conflict, civil unrest and terrorism. And there's another kind of aspect that can affect Australians beyond those who have family members across the region. Obviously, Australia, very multicultural. There's also the aspect that the airspace has closed above multiple Middle Eastern countries, and that's one of the main ways that Australians trying to get to other parts of the world, you have to go through the Middle East.
Yeah.
So at the time of recording, the airspace above Qatar is either closed or very limited. So that is going to be affecting a lot of Australians around the world.
A huge travel port for millions of Australians and travellers everywhere, really.
Yeah.
Lucy, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. By no means a simple one to tackle, but we really appreciate you explaining it to us so well. This is obviously a developing story. There are so many headlines continuing to come out, and we will, of course, keep you updated on everything you need to know and making sense of it all for you over on the Daily Aus Instagram. So keep an eye out there. We'll be answering your big questions throughout the week. That's it for today's episode. We will be back a little bit later on today with your evening news headlines. Until then, have a good one.